Colombia sits almost on the equator, and yet its capital city, home to more than 7 million people, is cold. Not mild, not occasionally cool, cold enough that residents wear wool and drink hot chocolate for breakfast. Bogotá sits at roughly 2,600 meters above sea level, higher than many European ski resorts. Drive a few hours west and the temperature can rise by 20 degrees. A warm Caribbean coast, turquoise and bright. And on the opposite side of the country, a Pacific coast almost no outsider pictures. Dark green rainforest pressing against the ocean, one of the wettest places on Earth. Fly south and you reach a Colombian city with no road connecting it to the rest of the country. Fly northwest and you land on Colombian islands where the local language is an English-based Creole. Between those extremes, wax palms rise through cloud forest fog. The desert meets the Caribbean Sea. And for a few months each year, a river turns red, yellow, green and blue, not because of minerals or pollution, but because of a single aquatic plant that blooms only when the water and weather align, briefly turning the lake's surface into a wide carpet of flowers. On the map, Colombia looks like one tropical country wedged between two oceans, but the map is lying. Because Colombia does not behave like a single climate, culture or landscape. Within one country, Caribbean beaches, high Andean cities like Bogotá, and Amazon rainforest can sit worlds apart, only hours from each other. It is the only country in South America that borders both the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. 3 branches of the Andes divide the interior into separate worlds, isolating valleys, cities and climates from one another across steep ridges and high mountain corridors. And the result is a country that behaves less like a single nation and more like a compressed continent, where every shift in altitude, coastline, river access, or isolation can create a different country inside the same borders, where the landscape, daily routines and local identity start to feel distinctly separate from the rest of the nation. This is the Colombia most outsiders never imagine. And the force behind all of it is not latitude, it is altitude, as the land climbs sharply from the lowlands into thinner, colder mountain air. The cold capital is the first clue, but to understand why Colombia feels like several countries, you need to understand the machine that creates its climates. Most countries change climate by moving north or south. Colombia changes climate by moving up. In the far south of Colombia, near the border with Ecuador, the Andes enter the country as a single mass of rock. But within a few hundred kilometers, something unusual happens. The mountains split. They divide into 3 separate ranges, the western, central, and eastern Cordilleras, and they splay apart as they move north. Between them, they create deep valleys, isolated plateaus, and river basins that rarely connect to each other. This is not a single mountain range, it is a wall system that fractures Colombia into vertical worlds. And the fracture creates something most outsiders never expect: altitude floors. Colombians have names for them. Below roughly 1,000 meters sits the Tierra Caliente, the hot land, sugarcane, tropical fruit and thick humid air. Climb higher, between roughly 1,000 and 2,000 meters, and you reach the Tierra Templada, the temperate zone. The air cools, coffee appears. Flowers grow in commercial quantities. Higher still, above 2,000 meters, lies the Tierra Fria, the cold land. Potatoes replace tropical crops. People wear wool. Morning frost is common. And above roughly 3,000 meters, where most plants cannot survive, sits the Paramo. This is one of the rarest ecosystems on Earth, a high-altitude grassland found almost exclusively in the northern Andes. The Páramo may look empty, but it is one of the most important landscapes in the country, because it functions as a water factory. Cloud moisture condenses on the frailejón leaves, drips into spongy soil, and feeds the rivers and reservoirs that supply drinking water to cities far below, including Bogotá. Altitude does not just change the temperature in Colombia, it changes what people eat, what they wear, what they grow, how they build. And where the water comes from, flowing down from the surrounding hills and collecting here across the landscape. A farmer in the Cauca Valley at 300 meters lives in a different agricultural world from a farmer outside Tunja at 2,700 meters, even though they share the same departmental border, touching at a single administrative line traced across the map between the two neighbouring areas. And because the three cordilleras do not run parallel but spread apart, they trap different climates in different valleys. The Magdalena Valley between the central and eastern Cordilleras is warm and low. The Cauca Valley between the western and central is fertile and tropical. The eastern Cordillera holds the high plateau where Bogotá sits. Each valley developed its own crops, its own settlement pattern, its own way of life, separated not by national borders but by walls of rock. These altitude floors do not just change the weather, they change what grows, and that created one of the most recognizable economies on Earth. In Bogotá, the equator means nothing. Altitude means everything. This is a city of more than 7 million people, spread across a high Andean plateau at roughly 2,600 meters above sea level. That is higher than many ski resorts in the Alps, and yet Bogotá sits almost exactly on the equator. On a cool morning, the city feels nothing like the tropics. Pedestrians wear wool sweaters and scarves. Breakfast often includes hot chocolate, served thick, sometimes with cheese melted into it. The weather shifts fast. Sunshine can turn to cold rain in minutes, then back again. There are no real seasons here, just altitude. Now look at the map. Bogotá sits on the eastern Cordillera, but just a few hours west, the landscape drops and changes completely. The grey plateau gives way to steep green hillsides, warmer air and clouds that sit low in the valleys. This is the coffee region. Here, between roughly 2,100 and 2,600 meters, Arabica coffee finds the conditions it needs. Not too hot, not too cold. That narrow band is not negotiable. Too low and the coffee ripens too fast, too high and it struggles to fruit at all. Colombian coffee is not just a crop, it is a product of altitude. In the Cauca Valley, wax palms rise 60 meters into the cloud forest fog, the tallest palm species on Earth. They look impossible here, thin trunks stretching above a misty canopy at an altitude where palms are not supposed to exist. Small towns like Salento and Finlandia sit on ridgelines surrounded by steep coffee slopes. Their houses are painted in bright colours. The coffee cultural landscape is a UNESCO World Heritage Site, but it is not the towns or the paint that earned that recognition. Across these steep terraced hillsides, it was the relationship between altitude, slope, and the crop that shaped everything, determining what could grow and how people worked the land. On these steep hillsides, coffee is still harvested largely by hand. Machines cannot navigate the gradient. Farmers climb the slopes picking selectively, only the ripe cherries, only at the right moment. The terrain makes this slow, but it also makes it precise. Both Bogotá and the coffee region exist because of altitude. One needed a cool plateau, the other needed a narrow climate band for a single crop. Both sit on the same mountain system, separated by roughly 1,000 meters of elevation and a few hours of mountain road. Altitude shaped the capital and the crop. But in one Colombian city, altitude created a different problem: how to connect a hillside metropolis that kept climbing. Medellín grew inside a narrow valley surrounded by steep hills, and when the city ran out of flat ground, it started climbing. The Abra Valley sits at roughly 1,500 meters above sea level, tucked between two walls of the central Cordillera. The valley floor is narrow, barely wide enough for a river and a handful of avenues, but the city's population kept growing. By the early 2000s, the metropolitan area held roughly 4 million people, and the only direction left to expand was up the hillsides. Neighborhoods spread onto slopes so steep that staircases replaced streets. Getting to the valley floor could take hours on winding roads or narrow footpaths. The most famous thing about Medellín's transformation is not what outsiders usually think. It is not a story about danger becoming safety. It is a story about slope. In 2004, Medellín opened the first line of its metro cable system, a public cable car integrated directly into the city's metro network. The gondolas did not carry tourists, they carried commuters. A trip that once took an hour on foot was reduced to minutes by air. The cable car did not just move people faster, it changed what was reachable. A hillside resident could now reach a hospital, a university, or a job interview in minutes. Later, the city installed outdoor escalators in Comuna 13, a hillside neighborhood where residents once climbed the equivalent of a 28-story building to reach their homes. The escalators were not a novelty. They were an answer to a geographic question. How do you make a vertical city function? Medellín's transformation is often reduced to a single arc, dangerous past, reborn present. But the reality is more layered. Inequality still shapes the city. Infrastructure did not erase poverty. What changed is that slope stopped being a wall between communities and opportunity. Altitude does not just shape climate and crops, it shapes cities. It determines who can reach what and how fast. The Andes created the problem, Colombians engineered the solution. Medellín rebuilt connection within its own terrain, but Colombia's terrain creates a much larger divide between the coasts that face two very different seas. Colombia is one of only two countries in South America that touch both the Caribbean Sea and the Pacific Ocean. But those two coasts could not be more different. The Andes stand between them, three mountain ranges that make crossing from one ocean to the other an enormous geographic effort. For centuries, that barrier shaped which coastline the outside world reached first, while the other side stayed hidden behind mountains and difficult terrain. The Caribbean side became the face Colombia showed the world. Cartagena de Indias was built as a fortress. Spanish colonists constructed some of the largest military fortifications in the Americas here, because Cartagena was the gateway. Gold, emeralds, and trade flowed through its harbour. Thick stone walls still ring the old city, rising directly from the waterfront. The light is Caribbean, the architecture colonial, and everywhere tourists move through the old streets, past balconies and stone facades. But the other coast tells a different story entirely. Colombia's Pacific coast, centered on the Department of Choco, is one of the wettest regions on Earth. Some monitoring stations in Choco have recorded annual rainfall exceeding 8,000 millimeters. The canopy is dense, heavy, and almost unbroken. Rivers, not roads, are the primary way people move. Choco is not a place most outsiders picture when they think of Colombia. There is no colonial fortress, no turquoise beach postcard, no cruise ship port. Instead, the Pacific coast is defined by rain, river networks and dense tropical forest that reaches all the way to the shoreline. The communities along Colombia's Pacific coast are predominantly Afro-Colombian. Their history here stretches back centuries, shaped by the rivers that provided both isolation and connection. Geography did not just create a different landscape on the Pacific side, it created different settlement patterns, different economies, and a different relationship with the rest of the country. The Caribbean coast had the ports, the trade, and the visibility. The Pacific coast had the rainfall, the rivers, and the distance. For a long time, the main connection between Colombia's Andean interior and the Caribbean coast was not a road, it was a river. The Magdalena River runs roughly 1,000 kilometers from the southern highlands to the Caribbean, and for centuries it was Colombia's most important transport corridor. Mompox, now also a UNESCO World Heritage Site, sits on a branch of the Magdalena. During the colonial era, this route was a vital stop between the interior and the coast, where inland goods and travellers moved on toward the ports. But when the river's main channel shifted and newer transport routes developed, Mompox lost its commercial purpose. The town did not disappear, it froze. Its colonial architecture survived precisely because the economy moved elsewhere. Two coasts, two histories, two different relationships with the rest of the country, shaped by distance, trade, and by the people moving through ports, harbours, and waterfront streets over generations. The Caribbean side built walls to protect what arrived by sea. The Pacific side was shaped by what fell from the sky. And between them, the mountains made sure neither coast could easily know the other. With both a Caribbean and a Pacific coast, Colombia is not one story told along one shoreline, but a country shaped by two very different edges of the sea. But some of the country's most surprising edges are nowhere near the sea, hidden instead in its interior landscapes, where cliffs, canyons, and sudden drop-offs cut through the land far from the coast. By now, Colombia has changed altitude, climate, and character several times without ever leaving its borders. The Andes have split the country into vertical worlds. The capital sits cold on a high plateau. The coffee region grows its most famous export in a narrow altitude band, along steep green mountain slopes where mist, rainfall, and temperature create the right conditions for coffee. Medellín built cable cars to solve a problem created by slope, and two very different coasts have shaped two different national stories. But Colombia is about to change again, because the map still has edges the viewer has not reached. On Colombia's Caribbean coast, there is a city you cannot reach by road from the rest of the country, cut off by sea and dense surrounding terrain. Look at a road density map of Colombia. In the Andean highlands and along the Caribbean coast, the network is tight. But as you move south and east, those lines on the map begin to thin out. Roads and settlements grow farther apart, and across wide, empty stretches of land, they disappear entirely. Southern Colombia has vast stretches with no paved road at all. The terrain shifts from mountains to lowland rainforest, and the infrastructure simply does not follow. At the country's southernmost point sits Leticia, a city of roughly 50,000 people on the banks of the Amazon River. There is no road connecting Leticia to the rest of Colombia. To reach it, residents fly or take boats. The nearest Colombian city reachable by road is hundreds of kilometers of rainforest away. But Leticia is not isolated in the way you might expect. It sits at a triple border, the point where Colombia, Brazil and Peru meet. On the Brazilian side, the city of Tabatinga begins almost immediately. Residents cross between the two countries on foot or by boat, often several times a day. Brazilian reais circulate alongside Colombian pesos. River commerce flows between three national jurisdictions without a customs checkpoint in sight for most daily crossings. This is what roadless Colombia looks like. Not emptiness, but a different system. The Amazon River is the highway, boats are the buses. Addresses are measured in river distance, not street numbers. For communities along the Colombian Amazon, movement follows water, supplies arrive by river, children travel to school by canoe. Trade depends on seasonal water levels. The infrastructure that most Colombians take for granted, asphalt, bus routes, fuel stations, simply does not exist here. The river replaces all of it. And this is not a small corner of the country. Colombia's Amazon region covers a significant share of its total land area. But almost no one outside Colombia thinks of it as an Amazon country, even though a vast swathe of the Amazon rainforest spreads across the country's entire southern half. Now shift the map again. East of the Andes, the terrain flattens into something entirely different. Los Llanos, the eastern plains, stretch toward the horizon in every direction. Flat, open, enormous. Grassland interrupted by rivers. A landscape that looks nothing like the mountains, nothing like the coast, and nothing like the Amazon. And further south, in the Huila department, Tatacoa sits in a landscape often called a desert. But it is technically a dry tropical forest, a narrow valley shielded from rain by surrounding mountains. Its eroded rock formations, red earth and sparse vegetation feel imported from another continent. These are not the Colombias that appear on postcards. No Caribbean fortress, no Andean skyline, no coffee hillside, just flatness, dryness and distance. Proving once more that one country can contain landscapes that contradict each other completely. The roadless Amazon south is one kind of Colombian frontier, but the country's edges stretch in other directions too, toward a desert that meets the sea. And islands where road signs, street conversations and everyday life unfold in a different language at every turn. The northernmost point of South America is not a tropical beach, it is a desert. Punta Galinas, at the tip of Colombia's La Guajira Peninsula, is where wind-shaped sand dunes slope directly into the Caribbean Sea. There are no high-rise hotels here, no palm-lined promenades, just wind, salt, cactus and light so bright it bleaches the horizon white. This is one of the driest places in Colombia, and it looks nothing like the country most people imagine. This is Wayuu territory. The Wayuu are Colombia's largest indigenous group, with a population estimated at several 100,000. They have their own language, Wayunaiki, their own system of justice and their own relationship with this land that long predates any national border. The desert did not push people away, it shaped a way of life built around wind, water scarcity and seasonal movement. La Guajira is not marginal Colombia. It is a different Colombia, one defined by aridity, autonomy and deep continuity. Now look at the map again. Roughly 775 kilometers from Colombia's Caribbean coast, closer to Nicaragua than to Bogotá, sit two small islands. San Andrés and Providencia are Colombian territory, but their culture, their architecture and their oldest language belong to a different world. The Raizal community speaks San Andrés Providencia Creole, a language built from English and African roots, not Spanish. For centuries, distance from the mainland allowed a distinct Caribbean identity to develop here. The churches were Protestant. The food was coconut-based. The music drew from calypso and reggae traditions, blending syncopated rhythms with the laid-back pulse heard across the Caribbean, from street parades to beachside bars. When you land on San Andrés, you are still in Colombia. But the cultural references can feel closer to Jamaica or the Cayman Islands than to Medellín. This is not a quirk, it is a consequence of geography. Island distance preserved what mainland proximity would have diluted. Even today, as mainland migration has grown significantly, the Raizal community navigates a careful tension, maintaining cultural identity while sharing limited island space. It is one of the quieter identity questions in the country, but it may be one of the most revealing. Colombian identity is not held together by language alone. It is held together by borders on a map, borders that contain a desert, islands, and languages the mainland has never heard, still spoken from village to village across these remote islands and carried forward for generations. Desert, islands and languages the mainland rarely hears. Colombia's edges keep stretching the definition of what one country can hold. And yet this country has one more surprise, a place where the landscape itself changes colour. Not through chemistry, not through magic, through ecology. For most of the year, Caño Cristalis looks like any other river in the Colombian interior. Clear water over grey rock. Ordinary. But between roughly June and November, the riverbed transforms. Vivid reds, greens, yellows and blues spread across the stone beneath the surface. Those vivid reds, pinks and greens come from a single aquatic plant, Macarenia clavigera, growing just beneath the water's surface. When water levels drop to a specific range and sunlight reaches the riverbed at the right angle, the plant turns an intense red. Other species add green, yellow and blue. It is not a chemical reaction. It is not mineral pigment. It is a living organism responding to seasonal conditions. And this is the part most visitors never hear. Caño Cristalis is not open year-round. Access is restricted to a defined season. Visitor numbers are limited. The riverbed is fragile and the colours exist precisely because the site is managed. The spectacle survives because it is protected, not despite protection. But Caño Cristalis is not the only Colombian landscape where access and altitude create something outsiders rarely expect. On the opposite side of the country, the Sierra Nevada de Santa Marta rises from the Caribbean coast to over 5,000 metres in less than 50 kilometres. It is one of the highest coastal mountain ranges on Earth, Within that compressed vertical space, ecosystems shift from tropical beach to cloud forest to snow. And high on its slopes sits Tayuna, the settlement outsiders call the Lost City. Built by the Tairona people, Tayuna was established centuries before the Inca Empire reached its peak. Stone terraces climb through mountain jungle, connected by paths worn into the slope over generations. But this is not an abandoned ruin. The Kogi and related communities who descend from the Tairona still live in the Sierra Nevada. They are not custodians of a museum. They are stewards of a living territory, where people still pass through its streets and paths, use it and shape it every day. When visitors reach the stone terraces after a multi-day hike, they are entering a landscape that has been continuously inhabited and cared for. The Lost City is not lost. It was always known to the people who built its stone terraces and to the indigenous communities still living in these mountains. A river that changes colour because of ecology. A mountain city older than the Inca Empire still watched over by its original stewards. Colombia does not need exaggeration. Its geography is the spectacle. In Colombia, the map does more than show distance. It reveals climate too, shifting from the cool Andean highlands around Bogotá to the hot Caribbean coast. Look at this map again. The same map from the beginning of this episode. The borders have not moved, the coastlines have not shifted. But the country inside those borders should feel entirely different now, in the streets, in the sound of the language around you, and in the everyday rhythm of life. Because every line on this map hides a change in altitude, and every change in altitude creates a different world. Here, at 2,600 metres, a capital city where 7 million people wear wool near the equator. Here, a few hundred metres lower, a band of mountain slope where one of the world's most recognised coffees can grow, and only here. Here, a valley city that built cable cars not for tourists, but to solve the problem of living on a slope. Here, a Caribbean coast the world already knows, and here, a Pacific coast it almost never sees. Here, a desert that meets the sea. Here, islands where the language is not Spanish. Here, a river that has no road to it, and here a riverbed that turns red, green and yellow, not because of chemistry, but because of ecology. No other country near the equator holds glaciers, paramo, cloud forest, tropical lowland, desert, Pacific rainforest, Amazon River and Caribbean islands inside the same borders. Colombia is not one climate, it is not one culture, it is not one landscape. It is a compressed continent, a place where geography changes everything, and the map has been trying to tell us that all along. Most outsiders picture one Colombia. The real number is much higher. and the question is not whether Colombia is more than its image. The question is whether any country on Earth compresses this many worlds into one set of borders and still calls itself one name.